Good morning, everybody. I'm Sula Jacobs, Superintendent at Olympic National Park. Hazel asked me to say just a few words to introduce the next 3 days. These days are all about sharing science important to the 8 parks in the Pacific Northwest. None of this would be possible without the extensive work by experts, tribes, other state and federal agencies, and universities sharing their hard work. I have learned and been able to determine next steps based on the sciences from these science days and conversations. Information from studies on the coast fortified our decision to focus on even more on new technology, which provides for a better experience. Updates on snowpack for a certain year help us work with communities on the upcoming wildfire season. Data about the Roosevelt elk help us keep visitors safe, and the list goes on and on. These projects are so important, and they remind me of a quote from President Roosevelt. Far and away, the best prize that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. Thank you so much to everybody for attending today, and thank you for the team who's been unbelievably hard at work to make these days possible. And with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to Andrew Ray. Andy?
Andy, why don't we jump ahead and have Brent jump in just now while you figure your mic out. Is that all right?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I don't know what was going on. Sorry about that all. Can you see my slide presentation?
Looks great.
Thanks. Okay, my name is Andrew Ray, and I'm the newly hired program manager for the North Coast and Cascades Inventory and Monitoring Network. I was excited that Hazel invited me to participate, and I'm eager to hear about your work and learn from everyone participating in Science Days. Before I get to my remarks, I wanted to echo Superintendent Jacobs' welcome to all the contributors, including scientists from tribal, federal, state, and local agencies, universities, and other participating organizations. We truly appreciate your participation. Your contributions will expand our understanding of national parks and the neighborhoods where they exist. I also want to reiterate our welcome to all attendees. We realize you all have very full schedules, and we appreciate your time and willingness to share your knowledge with the community of park stewards in our region. Over the next 3 days, we'll be hearing a lot about science across the diverse landscapes that make up the North Coast and Cascades network. You'll also learn about information needs, changes observed through long-term monitoring, and challenges we're facing in stewarding these special places. We recognize the topics covered over the next 3 days are diverse. This is fitting for a place that harbors so much biodiversity, and it's also essential to understanding the ecosystem of information needs to steward these lands for future generations. We invite you all to listen, engage in conversation, and participate as much as you can. There is so much to learn and much to share. Our hope is that the stories told here will help strengthen stewardship of these special places and serve as catalysts for future engagement. Now, before I tell you more about the NPS's Inventory and Monitoring Division and highlight the North Coast and Cascades Inventory and Monitoring Network, Hazel asked me to share a little bit about my background and where I'm from. So I've worked with the National Park Service's Inventory and Monitoring Division since 2012, and on projects directly connected with the National Park Service for nearly 20 years. I spent a decade as an ecologist working in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and the last few years supporting national parks across the Southwest. One of the most rewarding experiences in my Park Service career was working with the team at the Crater Lake Science and Learning Center. I am a strong supporter of collaborative conservation and recognize the need for leveraging the diverse skills of interdisciplinary teams. To begin our conversation about the NCCN, I want to first share a little history on science and monitoring in the National Park Service. This history is important as it outlines how the Inventory and Monitoring Division served as a response to the call for the adoption of the long view in the NPS's development of an action plan for protecting biological diversity. A 1980 State of the Parks report concluded that national parks are not immune to internal and external threats to biodiversity, and it recommended the NPS significantly expand its research and resource management capabilities. In 1986, then Director William Mott called for an increase in the adoption of a long-term view around park stewardship. The director also stated that science must become an essential ingredient of park management. The idea for the Inventory and Monitoring Division was not new at that time, but it was gaining traction through its inclusion in the 1987 report to the director entitled The Role of the National Park Service in Protecting Biological Diversity. The report also called for the expansion of existing park-based inventory and monitoring programs in 12 parks, including Olympic and North Cascades National Parks. More than a decade later, the concept for a system-wide inventory and monitoring program became a reality after Congress's approval of the 1998 National Parks Omnibus Act. This statute legally mandated the National Park Service to carry out inventory and monitoring of natural resources across the network of lands managed by the NPS. In 1999, the Natural Resource Challenge added meat to the idea and produced the National Park Service's Action Plan for Preserving Natural Resources. This action plan acknowledged the challenges of caring for our country's natural heritage within the complexities of modern landscapes. The action plan laid out 4 major principles: increase the role of science in decision-making, revitalize and expand natural resource programs, gather baseline data on resource conditions, and strengthen partnerships with the scientific community. The groundwork was laid, and the NCCN, the North Coast Cascades Network, and other I&M networks were launched. And by the early 2000s, networks began to track ecological characters of national parks from a long-term perspective. The overall aim of monitoring was to provide baselines of resource condition, determine the current status, and evaluate long-term trends of vital signs or key ecological indicators. This information would inform management decisions and also provide baseline reference data that allow the NPS and their partners to compare with altered landscapes. Today, we are also working to translate information on resource sensitivity into ecological forecasts that allow managers to consider how management actions today could help to prepare for resiliency needed to withstand future threats. At NCCN, we work directly with 8 national parks, but with scores of others through regional, range-wide, and national projects. Our work in parks is designed to monitor vital signs or a suite of indicators used to assess ecosystem health. Ecological vital signs include both physical and biological indicators that are sensitive to environmental change. Monitoring of vital signs can also reveal when ecosystems reach critical thresholds or tipping points. The most valuable vital sign indicators can be used to characterize the success of past management actions, inform future management actions, and support decisions that promote both human and ecological health. If you can tune in over the next few days, you'll hear from some of the NCCN scientists that are sharing updates from some of our core vital signs monitoring work. Each of the 32 networks, including the North Coast Cascades Network, monitors a select group of vital signs that are common among multiple parks. From the foundational language of our program, laid out in the early action plan, networks were set up to leverage multi-park and multi-partner investigations where parks could be used as replicates in a meta-analysis framework. The ecologists in the Zoom space understand this, but what it means in plain language is that the NPS's Inventory and Monitoring Division combines and analyzes monitoring results from multiple independent park units to generate a clear understanding of ecological pattern. These patterns are typically driven by changes in water availability, invasive species introductions, or in responses to changes in disturbance regimes. These patterns often serve as the basis for stories that we tell and that help to strengthen our understanding of ecosystem, landscape, and park health. Finally, the NPS is not alone in its important work to manage lands and neighborhoods of mixed use and in ways that limit biodiversity loss, expansion of invasive species, and building resilience for anticipated changes ahead. To do this, the NPS and the North Coast and Cascades Network are expanding our partnership portfolios and working at ecologically and management relevant scales. This is essential because maintaining biodiversity rests heavily on formal and informal protection of entire landscapes, including public and private lands that exist outside of national parks. This also acknowledges that we are part of a community of practitioners. It acknowledges that novel threats will require active work and long-term commitments. It acknowledges we must expand our monitoring toolbox, and it acknowledges we must enhance our understanding of past ecological threats and those that lie ahead. My hope is that our interest in participating in Science Days is part of our shared belief that monitoring data, interdisciplinary science, and work today and in the future will foundation and an enduring resource for managers charged with stewarding lands that make up the North Coast and Cascades Network. The commitment and contributions all of you make through your coordinated cross-boundary work matters. Thank you for your efforts and for sharing and celebrating what you've learned with participants over the next few days. Now I want to turn things over to Brent Johnson. Brent has been with the Natural Resources and Science at the Pacific West Regional Office since 2019. There, he's served in the role as Vegetation Ecologist. Prior to starting his position with the regional office, Brent was the integrated cultural and natural resources lead at Pinnacles National Park. He has also spent time at Yosemite, Sequoia and Kings Canyon, Point Reyes, and Golden Gate National Recreation Area. His research and resource management focal areas and interests include projects and programs that integrate cultural and natural resources, plant-animal interactions, and invasive species. I'll now turn the screen over to you, Brent.
All right, thank you. That was great. That was a great introduction to kick off the next few days. Yeah, lots of clapping going on, silent clapping icons. So it's really good. All right, can everybody you can see me and hear the and see the presentation? All right,
looks good.
Excellent. Okay, so well, I think it's a good time just to again echo what we've already heard. That this is a good opportunity the next few days to really focus on all this great work that you hear about, work that your colleagues are doing. The parks you visit are happening there, and just for folks here that are doing the work out there, working on projects for years or decades, that know that you're valued by so many people, by your colleagues, the people who visit the parks, and that this is going to be a great opportunity to share and celebrate those values. That those things that we care about, and let each other know that we value each other. So I think it'll be a really good opportunity and moment right now to share that. So and I wanted to just first talk about a little bit, Andrew mentioned a little bit about where I came from and work at the regional office and what that is. We have a small group of folks at the regional office in natural resources that are that work in the biological resources and natural resources. We have some ecologists, physical scientists, and really our jobs are to support people and serve the people that are doing the good work at the parks. We provide funding, we help with funding needs and opportunities. We work technical support. We help with just understanding and interpreting policy and laws, and really just there, really our primary goal is just to support you all that are there on the ground doing all that good work. So if you don't have those contacts in natural resources and science at the regional office, reach out. We can connect you with folks you need to talk to. We really enjoy. That's the best part of our jobs, is really talking to you all, connecting with that. So we really like to hear from you and that's how we feel good and valued, is when we get to help you all solve a problem, figure something out. And so you guys can keep focusing and doing the good work that you do. So, and in addition to this cadre of folks at the regional office, I should say, for folks who may not be as familiar, like, what is that? What is the region? The Pacific region is covers all the park units, national park units in the western states that include California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and the Nevada and the Pacific Islands as well, and a few parks that are in some of the a little bit further east than that. But those are the main states that we focus on. So it's a lot of parks. It's over like 60 units of park units that we get to work with. So definitely the best part of what I get to do is hearing about all of these different things that you guys are working on, and hearing about all those successes. So it's definitely a super fun, exciting job, and every day is just, you learn more and more about all the great things that are happening out there. So in addition to this regional office, there's also a group of folks that work at the national level, and the one particular group is the natural resource stewardship and science folks, and they are made up of, again, a bunch of work groups of various focal areas, including water resources, geological resources, biological resources, night sky, soundscapes, lots of, I think we'll even hear a little bit from some of those folks this week. And so they're there to provide technical support, funding needs at the national level. So again, that's their real primary focus, is to really get out there and help parks. And in 2016, that group came up with this science framework, and we looked to this a lot at the regional office. These four pillars that you can see there, that are really the cornerstone of this document, which is the holding the line, managing amid continuous change, levering conservation at scale, enhancing stewardship and science engagement. And underneath those, they talk about, they go in a little, what does holding the line mean? And it's the subtitles for that are: conserve and restore biodiversity and ecosystem integrity, address human activities within and adjacent to parks that affect natural resources, understand and develop capacity for maintaining and improving ecosystem processes and characters across the system. And then managing amid continuous change is promote restoration that builds long-term adaptive capacity, understand and develop mitigation measures for resolving stressors related to land use change, plan for and respond to climate change, anticipate and address emerging issues. That's a really good one, to be ready for these emerging issues, which we're seeing more and more of. Understand and respond to changing socioeconomic characteristics and cultural values that are relevant to the NPS mission. And then levering conservation at scale, which is the one I'm going to really be focusing on for the rest of my time here with you all. Is promote stewardship and science at landscape, seascape, and viewshed scales, establish and enhance partnerships and relationships, promote cooperative approaches to management and mitigation activities within the context of large landscapes, seascapes, and viewsheds. And then the last one is for enhancing stewardship and science access and engagement, is to build NPS capacity and leadership to promote science at all levels of the organization and with partners, other agencies, and the public. Synthesize, communicate scientific information and provide access to science to inform resource stewardship, and then proactively communicate across the NPS and with Congress, the Department of Interior, and other stakeholders about NPS stewardship and science priorities. So, as I said, today I'm really going to focus on this. And if you look at the four subheaders of this, the promote stewardship and science, landscape, seascape, and viewshed scales, establish and enhance partnerships, promote cooperative approaches to management and mitigation, activities within the context of large landscapes, seascapes, and viewsheds are really focused on the only way we can really do this is with partnerships. We can't, we have these terrific units scattered across the West, across the country, but we can't really be doing conservation at any large scale without connecting and working with others. We can do a lot of great things within our park units, but if we're really going to work on these larger scale issues and be a part of those, we really need to be focusing on how do we do that with other folks. And so I'm going to talk about 4 different examples, and they're from all over the West, and they're really they're different. They have different, but they have they're different scales and complexity and have different partners, but they do have common themes. So I'm just going to go through these 4 for the next few minutes and talk about each one, really focusing on how they work and how they function, and really just meant to. And I know that there's lots of other partnerships that are going on in the Pacific Northwest that you all are a part of. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list whatsoever, but they are different. They also are different levels of barriers to get up and running. So they're really meant to sort of show you that things like this can be done at varying scales, and it's always worth jumping into these things. So. All right, so I'm going to start first with talking about this sagebrush conservation design. And there's a few different scales to this. So this is really in 2022, the USGS came out with this sagebrush conservation design that really looks at sagebrush across the entire West. You can see this map of the whole Western United States there. And the dark blue is what this is showing is the different levels of sort of how the priority areas for restoration and conservation. So the darker blue is really the intact, high quality sagebrush that remains, which is shrinking every year, where you get losing a lot of this sagebrush. And then the lighter blue is sort of the mid-level, sort of okay quality. And then the brown is really, we've kind of lost it. So what this is trying to do is really demonstrate that, and like looking at the whole biome and seeing like where should we put our efforts to protect and preserve what is still intact, rather than trying to spend a significant amount of time trying to bring something back that is potentially highly degraded. It may be also difficult for land management, land use reasons as well. But this is really to look at the whole system together. And so that's, a whole bunch of people worked on this, got this all together, and that you can see, yeah, this is the same map with just the hot the core, the dark blue, the sort of the most intact sagebrush is called core sagebrush habitat areas. The lighter blue is sort of growth opportunity, sort of, yeah, maybe we can nudge this back to higher quality. And this you can see overlaid with the park units across the west. So this is really helping us in the National Park Service figure out, like, okay, how does this align with sort of the overarching biome-wide priorities? And interesting, one of the parks that has some of the most core sagebrush habitat areas is Craters of the Moon in Idaho. But there's 10 or more of national park units in both. This is really crosses two National Park Service regions, the Intermountain region and the Pacific West region, which is where I focus on as well. So one of the parks that's in the Pacific West region is Craters of the Moon. So this really helps us kind of target at that larger scale where we should focus for those. How do we work to keep these intact areas, protect them as best we can. So when we zoom down to Craters of the Moon, zoomed in, again, those same dark and light blue are those core areas, and we can apply. We already have identified those high priority intact areas. We can focus using sort of the RAD framework, resist, accept, direct framework, to actually institute and apply those, implement sort of restoration for these issues. And really, one of the problems, for those who aren't super familiar with some of the issues related to sagebrush, is that it has a complex relationship with fire, but it's been disrupted with sort of the introduction of primarily annual grasses, primarily cheatgrass, which has really altered the fire frequency and intensity, because this small little grass grows in between the greener, hardier native species of the shrubs and the perennial grasses and forbs, and that carries fire much further and more intensively than previously. So what you end up getting is large areas of pretty high intensity fire across sagebrush, and it can in one incident completely convert intact sagebrush into annual grasslands. And then it just repeats itself, because then you have this dry contiguous fuel source that they'll just continue to reburn and intact sagebrush will not come back without intervention. So how do we focus on those intact areas to keep them the way they are? By creating buffers, areas that are likely for ignition sources, to protect those areas that we want to. So we have this larger partnership at the biome level, and then within the national, we also have something that some of you may have heard of, which is NP Sage, which is a group. Again, a big part of this is inventory and monitoring has played a big role with really helping identify the issues, being our nexus with the USGS and other partners to be able to relay these larger issues at the biome level to individual parks, and helping the parks and the region identify the needs, and then be able to convert that into implementation. So as Andrew is mentioning, all the work that inventory and monitoring does, this is really a good example of one of the many examples of really seeing long-term monitoring, identifying some of the needs, and then converting that and translating that at the park level to then be able to make a difference. And then in addition to this larger partnership, we also have this NP Sage, which has tribal partners, university partners, multiple parks across two regions working together to identify these priority areas. And one thing I do want to highlight here is that park units, these, looking at this just with Craters of the Moon, there may be these core areas, these high quality sagebrush areas that have been identified. And I really like to think of it as that's a priority at that larger scale. But a park may still have high priority areas that are not identified here. And so I don't see it as that a park cannot work in something that hasn't been identified here, because there may be something else going on. There may be cultural landscapes, other cultural resource values, T&E species, many other things may be a reason to focus on something that is already degraded, but really does require additional investments to restore. So I really see this being value added to parks rather than saying, oh, well, you can't work in those degraded areas anymore. That this is in order to be a part of some of these sort of biome scale funding opportunities, then this is where the Department of Interior is to focus. However, there's lots of other ways to do those other things too. So it's not an or, like you can't work here anymore, but it's also, this is adding and informing how we select our places. But there may be things that weren't identified in this larger effort that still may be important at the park unit level. So and so kind of shifting to a much smaller scale of a project is the San Benito Working Landscapes Group. It's in San Benito County, which is a location of Pinnacles National Park. It was where, as many of you may have know, is the site for condor reintroduction program. And when it was about 20 years ago when the California condor was reintroduced to the area, and Pinnacles is a release site for California condors. But when that happened, that was that caused a lot of rift with the surrounding large ranching community. The park is completely surrounded by private lands, many of what are 20,000 acre ranches, and the condors do not stay inside the park boundary. It's a small 30,000 acre park. They go elsewhere to feed, and this was not taken well. So one of the things that the park did was initiate with park funding a group called the San Benito Working Landscapes Group that really went out and started forming these relationships with park ranchers, asking what their needs were, finding the common ground about working landscapes. There were many wildlife species that would nest rocks and pinnacles, but then use the adjacent ranchlands for hunting and other needs. So there was an interdependency there for pinnacles, for the wildlife and the natural resources within, that they needed these open working landscapes, beyond. So there was a lot of common ground that we could cross, but there was also really a lot of not too much trust between the neighboring community. So it took a few years. Through a partner, there was a working landscapes coordinator hired, and it's still going on now, that was really reached out, helped ranchers, talked to them about estate planning, helped coordinate and set up several conservation easements to keep the working landscapes in the families, and talk about the things that we both cared about. Ranchers hate invasive species. So that was one bridge that we found. If you talked about yellow star thistle with them, boy, and strategies for treatment, that was a bridge to build trust. That we got to they could see the Park Service and learn about what they were. We both learned that we both had these same animosities for these nasty weeds and things. So that kind of built things up, and then we could have some of the more difficult conversations about condors and other things. So that's been a real example that's really at a much smaller scale. You can see here the number of partners that are a part of it in the Working Landscapes group. Some of the ones, the California Rangeland Trust help with some of the conservation easements, tribal partners, the Amamutsan, NRCS. So lots of really good partners at both local and federal level, state and federal level, really being a part of that. And that's really helped kind of bridge that trust and build what we kind of need at that smaller scale. So rather than looking at this biome scale, this is really down at the county, and building that to help build trust with your community and find common ground beyond our park boundaries. So, all right, moving a little further west into to Hawaii. This is one that really focuses on the 17 remaining species of forest birds in Hawaii, and they're all 12 of them are likely to go extinct without substantial intervention. So they've been hit over the years with the habitat loss, and right now one of the biggest issues is avian malaria. That's just the last bit, which is moving further uphill into areas where the remaining forest birds are. So this is a real dire situation. We have very very few remaining these. Even the ones like the Akohe down in the bottom right there in Maui, there's 100 to 1900 left in the wild, but they have a very small range and very small distribution right now. So they're highly vulnerable to avian malaria because there's just a very limited distribution of them. So there's some that you can see that 5 remaining in the wild, fewer than 150 in the wild. So really a dire situation. But many prior to about 2017 and prior, again, inventory and monitoring was a big part of this, seeing their monitoring identified the loss, the drop in populations, and really kind of were part of the reason that raising the alarms for that. And they put together, started working. They didn't have any funding. They didn't know what to do, how they were going to pay for it, because it was going to be very expensive, but started putting a group of partners, university partners, state partners together to figure this out and really focus on what they could do. And a big one that's the big push right now is that landscape level mosquito control. So really figuring out ways and techniques, implementing, not just figuring out, but implementing ways to reduce the mosquito population. And the one that's really focused on now is this incompatible insect technique, which essentially makes male mosquitoes sterile, so it just can crash the population, which has been used in other parts of the world for human health and safety, but this is one of the first times for natural resources. But this is not something you can do at just a single park. It requires multiple island-wide effort and beyond to be able to do this. But they started this saying, we can't do nothing. We have to do something here to get this. And again, you see NGOs as a part of this. You see state and federal, tribal, Native Hawaiian groups working with this. So it's a real big partnership. Again, they started this with not knowing how they were going to fund this. And then another one, and again, inventory and monitoring, a big part of this. This is another group coming back onto the mainland. Whitebark pine is a conifer species that grows in mid to high elevations across the west into the Rockies and up in the Pacific Northwest and in the Sierra Nevada as well. So it has a pretty broad range. It is now listed as threatened by the Fish and Wildlife Service, federally listed threatened. Due to loss, we're losing quite a bit of it due to white pine blisterus and mountain pine beetle, which is spreading into areas that we haven't seen before. So there's a big effort to work on techniques again to find trees that are resistant to blister rust and be able to collect cones and grow resistant trees from those once we've identified those. So in this case, there's a group there's various scales of groups working together. The one that I'd like to focus on is the 5 Needle Pine Working Group, which is primarily National Park Service staff from across the West. And they get together once a month and talk about issues, emerging issues, techniques, what isn't working, partners that are helping. One of the partners that's been a big contributor to these is American Forests, who's helping a lot, doing a lot of the cone collection in various places across the West. So this is there's conservation strategies for this that are interagency, but we also have this small group that was relatively easy to kind of create, that because it's all National Park Service, and we just have a Teams meeting once a month to get together and talk about those issues. This is a little different than some of those other ones because it's internal, but it also is that wanted to share that because it is it's sort of something that's not as difficult to set up as some of these other partnerships too. So back to these 4 things, there are these common themes that you see across these, despite the scale, some island wide, some 2 of which are across the entire Western United States. One's just in one small little county. And but what you do see is in 3 of these is that inventory and monitoring has played an outsized role in helping with these. And they both not only identified were sort of the folks who helped identify some of the issues that were emerging before they may have been noticed by others, but they also took an extra step and beyond what those original goals of inventory monitoring was, due to there's the skills that are within inventory monitoring, but also that network scale that Andrew is talking about lends itself to really showing, being able to see things happening beyond an individual park boundary. So it's a real beneficial group that has really pushed forward on many. These are just a few examples of it. Inventory monitoring doing it across the country, and in many cases, really stepping up and helping parks with converting long-term monitoring results into action on the ground. So some of the things also that I didn't mention, as these, but we hear the common themes from those 4 is that, setting up a partnership ahead of time before before that you have a project in hand, it can really help. There's cultural differences across, agencies, even within the Department of Interior, working with your partners in your universities, your neighboring ranchers, other parks. There's things that's best to really take time to sort out. And so that's something that really helps if you can give that time and space to be able to work out your differences. Also, it creates a network for rapid communication when there's an emerging issue that's popping up. You have these networks that are in place for that, so you can relay information about a partner that's figured out a novel way to address an issue, or something or hey, we're seeing an outbreak of something that's happening in Montana. What are you guys seeing? It really helps to have these networks set up, so we can be both nimble to change and resilient, so we can be ready to turn and deal with these emerging issues together. And one of the things that all these projects had in common is that they did not have funding. When they were starting to come together, they were like, well, we need to do something. We need a strategy. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. But 3 of these were in the last few years, because of all the upfront work with partnerships have received over $10 million from recent funding initiatives over the last few years and have benefited from all that partnership and planning work, even when they were saying, people were saying, well, yeah, this is great, but how are we going to pay for this? Well, they built something and then it really paid for it. So really sort of the take home message is, that there's times, there's cycles when there's a fire hose of funding coming in, and it's really important to be prepared for that. So when we're moving into a period where there may not be as much funding, this is an opportunity and a time to start to build those partnerships. Think about those times when that funding may come again. So those are those opportunities, and there's something that to be thinking about, so we can be ready for the future for all these issues. So yeah, so that's what I have. Hopefully that was trying to just give you some thoughts and inspiration for different kinds of partnerships that may be relevant to what you all do. So thank you.